Chapter 8, Lesson 1, The Confederation Era. Main idea: the Articles of Confederation were too weak to govern the nation after the war ended. One American story. In 1775, Daniel Boone and 30 woodsmen cut a road over the Appalachian Mountains into Kentucky. After about 250 miles, they arrived in a meadow along the banks of the Kentucky River. Felix Walker, a member of Boone's party, described what they saw. A voice from the past. On entering the plain, we were permitted to view very interesting and romantic sight. A number of buffaloes, between 200 and 300, made off. Such a sight some of us never saw before, nor perhaps ever may again. From Felix Walker, quoted in The Life and Adventures of Daniel Boone. In the late 1700s, most Americans thought of Kentucky as the wild frontier. Some, like Boone, looked at the frontier and saw a world of opportunity. Exploring and governing these lands was one of the many challenges facing the new government of the United States. Moving west. The trail into Kentucky that Daniel Boone helped build was called the Wilderness Road. This road was not easy to travel. It was too narrow for carts or wagons, but it became the main road into Kentucky. The settlers came on foot or on horseback. Settlers were drawn to Kentucky's rich river valleys, where a few Native Americans lived. But some Native Americans, such as the Shawnee, did live, hunt, and fish in the area. Tensions between Native Americans and settlers led to violent confrontations, but the settlers did not stop coming. By the early 1790s, about 100,000 Americans lived there. While settlers headed into the western territories, the people in the east began to create new state governments. New state governments. Once the American colonies declared independence, each of these states set out to create its own government. The framers, or creators, of the state constitutions did not want to destroy the political systems that they had had as colonies. They simply wanted to make those systems more democratic. Some states experimented with creating separate branches of government, giving different powers to different branches. By creating separate branches, Americans hoped to prevent the government from becoming too powerful. Nearly all states tried to weaken the executive branch. Terms of office were usually short, and elections were held frequently. Most states made property ownership a requirement for holding office or voting. Some states began passing laws gradually abolishing slavery. In 1783, a court decision ruled that Massachusetts' 1780 Constitution effectively outlawed slavery by declaring that all men are born free and equal. By 1786, 5 states had abolished slavery. Some states included a Bill of Rights in their constitutions as a way to keep the government under control. The idea of a Bill of Rights came from the English Bill of Rights of 1689. This was a list of rights that the government guaranteed to English citizens. Although not all the states had a Bill of Rights, all of them did have a republican form of government. In a republic, the people choose representatives to govern them. The Articles of Confederation. While the states were setting up their governments, Americans also discussed the form of their national government. During the Revolutionary War, Americans realized that they needed to unite to win the war against Britain. As Silas Deane, a diplomat from Connecticut, wrote, "United we stand, divided we fall." In 1776, the Continental Congress began to develop a plan for a national government. Congress agreed that the government should be a republic, but the delegates disagreed about whether each state should have one vote or voting should be based on population. They also disagreed about whether the national government or the individual states should control the lands west of the Appalachians. The Continental Congress eventually arrived at the final plan, called the Articles of Confederation. In the Articles, the national government had few powers because many Americans were afraid that a strong government would lead to tyranny or oppressive rule. The national government was run by a Confederation Congress. Each state had only one vote in the Congress. The national government had the power to wage war, make peace, sign treaties, and issue money. But the Articles left most important powers to the states. These powers included the authority to set taxes and enforce national laws. The Articles proposed to leave the states in control of the lands west of the Appalachian Mountains. The Continental Congress passed the Articles of Confederation in November 1777. It then sent the Articles to the states for ratification or approval. By July 1778, 8 states had ratified the Articles. But some of the small states that did not have Western lands claims refused to sign. These states felt that unless the Western lands were placed under the control of the national government, they would be at a disadvantage. The states with Western lands could sell them to pay off debts left from the Revolution, but states without lands would have difficulty paying off the high war debts. Over the next 3 years, all the states gave up their claims to Western lands. This led the small states to ratify the Articles. In 1781, Maryland became the 13th state to accept the Articles. As a result, the United States finally had an official government. The Northwest Ordinance. One of the most important questions that the Confederation Congress faced was what to do with the Western lands that it now controlled. Congress passed important laws on how to divide and govern these lands: the Land Ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. The Land Ordinance of 1785 called for surveyors to stake out 6 square-mile plots, called townships, in the Western lands. Each township was to set aside a square-mile section of land for schools, marking the first time the national government promoted public education. These lands later became known as the Northwest Territory. The Northwest Territory included land that formed the states of Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin, and a part of Minnesota. The Northwest Ordinance described how the Northwest Territory was to be governed. As the territory grew in population, it would gain rights to self-government. When there were 60,000 people, they could apply to become a new state. The Northwest Ordinance also set conditions for settlement in the Northwest Territory and outlined the settlers' rights. Slavery was outlawed, but indentured servitude still existed, and slaves already in the territories were not automatically freed. Fugitives would be returned. The rivers were to be open to navigation by all. Freedom of religion and trial by jury were guaranteed. The Northwest Ordinance was important because it set a pattern for the orderly growth of the United States. As the nation grew, it followed this pattern in territories added after the Northwest Territory. The decision to ban slavery in the Northwest Territory contributed to the growing division between North and South over the practice. Weaknesses of the Articles. Aside from its handling of land issues, however, the Confederation Congress had few successes. By the end of the Revolutionary War, the United States faced serious problems, and the Confederation Congress did not have enough power to solve them. Debt was a critical problem for the government. Congress had borrowed large sums to pay for the Revolutionary War. Much of that money was owed to soldiers of its own army. Upset at not being paid, several hundred soldiers surrounded the Pennsylvania State House where Congress was meeting in June 1783. The soldiers threatened the legislators, thrusting their bayonets through the windows. The delegates were forced to flee the city. The event was a clear sign of Congress's weakness. Even if Congress wanted to pay the soldiers, it did not have the power to levy taxes. The national government depended on the states to send money to Congress, but the states sent very little money. Congress was not alone in facing economic crisis. People thought that the nation faced hard times. In Massachusetts, the economy was so bad that people rose up in arms against the government. The U.S. government from 1776 to 1787. Successes of the Confederation Congress. Governed the nation during the Revolutionary War. Negotiated the Treaty of Paris at the end of the war. Passed the Land Ordinance of 1785 and passed the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation: lacked power to enforce laws, lacked power to levy taxes, lacked power to regulate trade among the states, required all 13 states to approve changes in the Articles. Shays' Rebellion. In the mid-1780s, Massachusetts faced economic problems, as did other states. People had little money, but the state continued to levy high taxes. The average family owed $200 in taxes per year, more money than most farmers made. Many Massachusetts farmers fell deeply into debt. Debt laws at the time were strict. Anyone who could not repay his debts would have his property auctioned off. If the auction didn't raise enough money to settle the debts, the debtor could be put in jail. In western Massachusetts, many jails were packed with debtors. Farmers asked the Massachusetts legislature to provide debt relief, but the legislature refused and the farmers rebelled. One of the leaders of the rebellion was a Revolutionary War veteran named Daniel Shays. He commanded a group of about 1,500 men. In January 1787, Shays and his men marched on a federal arsenal, a place to store weapons. The arsenal was defended by 900 soldiers from the state militia. The militia quickly defeated Shays' men. But even though the militia put down Shays' rebellion, as the uprising came to be known, the farmers won the sympathy of many people. America's leaders realized that an armed uprising of common farmers spelled danger for the nation. Some leaders hoped that the nation's ills could be solved by strengthening the national government. In the next section, you'll read how Americans held a convention to change the Articles of Confederation.